Hey everyone, Captain Sean here with a special review for the classic 90s sitcom series, The Torkelsons, a show that was actually developed and produced by Michael Jacobs, best known as the creator of Boy Meets World and Girl Meets World. And just to say it right off the bat, if you are a big fan of Boy Meets World and Girl Meets World, then The Torkelsons is a must-see show you should check out. It really does fill in the gap and gives off the same feel Boy and Girl Meets World had. Similar to those two series, the show focuses on a realistic family trying to get by in the world, dealing with realistic situations, all the while learning important life lessons. Only in this series, it's about a single mother with 5 children in a lower class environment. Now, even though the series focused on the difficulties that those in poverty encounter, it still delved into timeless morals and true-to-life human emotions that all types of people go through, fueled with amazing writing and great acting. Now, what's pretty interesting about the history of this show is, it's the first sitcom Disney television ever made. Yes, this is the predecessor to every Disney sitcom out there. So, how does this Michael Jacobs produced show hold up to his bigger hit Boy Meets World, along with all future Disney sitcoms including Girl Meets World? Well, there's actually quite a lot to talk about with this series. So today, we'll be having a very special, in-depth retrospective on the series. This will involve analyzing every episode from the show's first season, taking a look at how things went in the show's second season, and then finally discuss why this great series was canceled after a short run of 33 episodes. And yes, there will be spoilers. So if you're just remotely interested in the show, stop watching this review and start watching the series now. But if this quick introduction hasn't convinced you to start watching the show yet, then stick around, because by the end of this review, hopefully you will be. And so, here we go. The first few episodes of the series focuses on a family including 5 kids and 1 single mother just trying to get by in life. Of the 5 kids, the one that is given the most screen time and character development by far is Dorothy Jane Torkelson, a highly articulate old soul with a love of poetry, and she has great dreams for a better life. In the first few episodes, a lot of time is spent with the characters going through many of the day-to-day difficulties that come from living in poverty, and more specifically, having no money to buy simple everyday necessities and much desired luxuries. The first episode focuses on the family having their washing machine getting repossessed, while Dorothy Jane has to deal with the embarrassment that comes from letting her new neighbor Riley, played by Michael Landis, learn of what kind of home she lives in. Then the second episode deals with Dorothy Jane trying to hide the fact that she got her school dance dress from a thrift store and dealing with the ridicule that comes when people discover that she did. Then in the third episode, we get a pretty complex story that reveals how the Torkelson family is a very spiritual and religious family, but they don't often go to their local church, with the reason being, the churches often donated things to them, and they didn't appreciate that since they want to be viewed as a family that can serve the community, rather than just being solely served by them. It's a pretty interesting story that parallels with what some adults in real-life poverty do face. They don't want a free handout. They want to be viewed as independent and capable providers, and to not be viewed as that just brings more pain to the already difficult realization of what kind of life they're living. Now, the only character in the show to receive just as much screen time as Dorothy Jane is her mother, Millicent. Now, in the first few episodes, Millicent acts way too silly and happy sounding for a woman with 5 kids living in poverty who claims her husband left her not long ago. You at first think this is a sign of bad acting, but then you eventually realize it was actually meant to look like bad acting, because early on in a scene where Dorothy Jane confronts her mom about how frustrated she is with her mom's behavior, Millicent reveals it's only an act she's been doing in order to help her family feel better. And it's only when she's alone with Dorothy Jane do you start to see her true traumatized emotions come through. Now, even after this scene, Millicent does continue to act a bit silly, but as the season progresses, she does start to calm down a bit and act like a realistic mother more often once she stops denying the emotions and stress that she is feeling, and she begins to talk more openly about how she feels with other adults around her, most notably with Mr. Hodges, a kind old man who begins renting out the family's basement starting in the first episode. As the show moves forward, Mr. Hodges slowly but surely evolves into a grandfather-like figure for the family. He never boldly intrudes on any of the family members' personal lives, but gives just the right simple and to-the-point advice that many of the children, and even Millicent, need at just the right time. A great example of this is in the 4th episode, when Millicent gives up her business from home doing odd jobs career to take on a job outside the home where she'll make more money, but with the negative side effect of now being with her children much less. However, when Millicent tells Mr. Hodges how this new job she makes allows her to get just $17 more a week than she used to, Mr. Hodges nudges Millicent to go back to her old work-from-home business and helps Millicent realize $17 extra a week just isn't a price worth paying if it keeps you away from your children. The 5th episode, Poetry in Motion, is when the show starts to really show its true good quality. Dorothy Jane has been having a huge crush on the boy next door, Riley, for quite a while now. However, Riley is a bit older than Dorothy Jane, and it's realistically a relationship that will never happen. However, Dorothy Jane is a poet and a dreamer who can only see the fantasy she's created of her and Riley being together one day in reality. She actually is so bold about her feelings that she actually throws herself literally at Riley, kissing him, and runs up, hoping he'll eventually chase after her and do the same. And despite every realistic thing her mother tells her, Dorothy Jane holds true to her dreams coming true. But when Riley does return, everybody but Dorothy Jane can only dread what is about to happen. Now, the episode cleverly doesn't even show the scene of Riley letting Dorothy Jane down easy, because you know how it's going to play out. Instead, it just cuts to Dorothy Jane being all alone outside. And when she comes out, all Millicent can do is silently hug her daughter. Because what words can quickly help a young girl when for the first time in her life, she's experienced feeling her dreams and her heart break. Now, the 6th episode isn't as strong a story, but it does feature a nice tale in which Dorothy Jane is trying to enter a contest to win a trip to Paris, but the contest judges wish to meet her at her house. Dorothy Jane has been very embarrassed about allowing anyone to meet her family up until this point, but this is the episode where she finally accepts her family as they are, a change in her character that lasts for the rest of the series. Yes, that's right. This is actually a sitcom with actual ongoing character development and permanent consequences to what the characters are going through. Now, sure, many other classic sitcoms had special turning point stories for certain characters, but once you get past the first 4 episodes, the Torkelsons actually features many turning points in the characters' development. This might be commonplace for drama shows, but it's actually quite refreshing to see a sitcom actually have strong continuity between most episodes. And by the way, that's episodes in airing order. Despite online wikis saying these episodes were aired out of production order, the season 1 episodes were apparently actually aired where they were supposed to story-wise. And the season-long story hits a major turning point in episode 7, Men Don't Leave. In this story, everything seems to start off like a normal day, but then suddenly, the kid's father, Randall, just walks in out of nowhere after not seeing his family for a year and a half. This drop-in takes everybody by surprise. The younger kids are happy to see their father, but both Dorothy Jane and Millicent are very cautious as this tale progresses. Randall claims to want to be part of the family again, and he's very upset Millicent wants to finalize their divorce. Now, on one hand, you hope Randall means what he says, since you want to see a broken family get back together. But then, there's some well-timed dialogue where the characters naturally talk about their past, rather than just exposit about it. It's revealed Randall has been with his family on and off for the last 15 years, and he's actually never stayed at the home for more than 36 days at one time. But here's where the story gets very complex. Millicent is a deeply spiritual and religious woman who wants to stay loyal to her husband. She spent the last 15 years hoping things would get better and has let him do anything he's wanted to do to her out of love and commitment to him, even having a total of 5 children with him despite his wrongdoings in the past, which included being with other women. You can tell while watching their interactions together in this episode that Millicent does love Randall, but yet she knows if they continue to remain married, it will only bring further pain and misery. And you can tell when Millicent speaks, it's hard for her to admit this realization that took her over a decade to realize.
I have never been with another man.
Why are you bringing this up now?
Because I want you to know there is no one else in my heart. And there never has been when I tell you, I don't know if I'll want you back.
But despite all this, Millicent goes out of her way to not speak negatively of Randall in front of the children. She even keeps trying to get Dorothy Jane, who resents her father more than any of the other kids, to spend time with him, or at least simply give him a hug. Now, one would wonder why Randall is acting so kind and sweet during most of the story, despite doing very awful things at other times. Well, the episode doesn't explicitly say it, but he does have many of the signs of bipolar disorder. That being, he can have very positive feelings related to how he feels about his family one day, and then have very uncaring and negative feelings about his family the next. It's something that does happen with some families of all socioeconomic statuses, but it's unfortunately something that happens all the more often in low-income and very poverty-stricken areas, since people in those communities are less likely to be able to properly identify the behavior and prescribe and afford the proper medical attention these people need. But you can tell Millicent might be aware of this, because as soon as Randall proclaims he's truly gonna stay for good, she realizes he probably will soon change his mind. So Millicent sternly encourages Dorothy Jane one night to hug her father, because she knows it might be the last time she gets the chance. And then sadly, Randall does leave in the middle of the night, only leaving behind a set of signed divorce papers. The final scene of the episode features very little dialogue. It's simply Millicent silently looking at the divorce papers. She knew this was coming, but because the reality is finally cemented, it only hurts all the more. The next story, episode 8, Thanksgiving Me Something, while being a lighter tale, actually plays off the previous episode perfectly. Millicent is now completely single, and since her ex-husband was the only person she dated long ago, she honestly has no idea on how to move forward with the dating scene. With some nudging from Dorothy Jane, though, she invites the very single church pastor to have Thanksgiving dinner with them. They also invite a local Native American man to have Thanksgiving with them as well, which actually makes you suddenly realize, why is there usually never any Native American characters seen in present-day Thanksgiving stories?
Actually, it's not a big Indian holiday. You know, it's supposed to be a going-away party for you people. But you never went away.
Okay, that was actually a good point and good joke. The story features Millicent actually starting to freak out at one point when she realizes she's surrounded by two single men. She retreats to Dorothy Jane's room, and Dorothy Jane actually starts to comfort her mother. You see, despite their wide age gap, the two both have only had experience at loving one person. So they're both moving forward with a potential second romance in their life at the same time now. So from this point in the series moving forward, the two start to become more like sisters at times when talking about and dealing with certain issues. Now, Millicent does not start dating either of the two men she invited over, but by interacting with them and doing a little bit of flirting at the end, it does show she is ready to move forward with her life. Then we get episode 9, Return to Sender, another really good story. Mr. Hodges has been getting a lot of Return to Sender mail being sent to him throughout the season thus far, and in this episode, he finally feels comfortable enough to reveal his backstory to the family. You see, Mr. Hodges only had one child, his son, who grew up and had one daughter named Molly, but then Mr. Hodges' son died. But his daughter-in-law married another man, and they haven't responded to Mr. Hodges' letters since, assumingly because his granddaughter's new family wants to sever ties with any part of her past that comes from a very poverty-stricken environment. But then, Millicent and the kids arrange for Mr. Hodges' granddaughter Molly and his daughter-in-law, played by Patty Duke, to come visit him. And we learn there's more complexity to this story. Little Molly's new stepfather may not be a big fan of Mr. Hodges, but Mr. Hodges still wasn't invited to live with a family. But he declined, because even though he would love to live with his granddaughter Molly, seeing her be loved by a father that is not his son would only bring Mr. Hodges the all-too painful memory of losing his son back to the forefront of his mind, which is something that would be too much for him. The episode is really the only story that gives sole focus to Mr. Hodges' character, and actor William Charlotte, who plays him, expertly carries this very well-written tale.
I'm going to tell you a story that I want you never to forget.
Okay.
Once upon a time, there was a young man named Michael.
That used to be my daddy's name.
And he had a little girl that he loved more than anything.
That would be me.
Even though the little girl's father had to go away, he left a little piece of himself for her to always carry in her heart. And every so often, as the girl grows up, she will say something or do something very kind or very sweet, which will make her remember that piece of her father, which will always be with her as long as she lives.
Now the episode ends with Mr. Hodges parting ways with his family, followed by him having a meal at night, all alone. But then the final moment of the episode reminds us, even if you don't have your real family, you are still never alone.
Is that a bologna sandwich you got there, Border Hodges?
Now after a long string of more dramatic stories, we get episode 10, I Fought the Law, which features a much lighter story about the family trying to run a little food stand business, but the law gets in their way, so Millicent goes full-on rebel without a serious cause against the police, until Dorothy, Jane of all people, is able to work out a deal where Millicent can actually do her food stand business outside of a grocery store on Saturdays. It's pretty much standard sitcom stuff, but it's not that bad. The next story is episode 11, A Sigh is Just a Sigh, where finally the other kids in the family get some character development where they have to deal with a school bully. It's your standard 80s, 90s sitcom plot of dealing with a bully. There's not much to say here. But then, things get better in episode 12, Educating Millicent. The story starts with Millicent, for the first time ever, finding herself having a hard time helping Dorothy Jane with her math homework. And why is high school math so hard for Millicent? Well, upon discovering some of the local high school's old yearbooks, the kids learn Millicent didn't finish high school when she was younger. Now at first, both her kids and the audience think she dropped out simply because it was too hard for her. But then, Dorothy Jane, who was never 100% sure of her mom's real age, looks at the old high school records, does the math, and then realizes Millicent's real reason for dropping out of high school when she was a teenager.
I figured it out. It's simple addition. I'm the reason you didn't graduate. You were pregnant with me.
Yep, that's right. Andy Mack was not the first Disney show to tackle teenage pregnancy. It was this one. Now, this shocking bit of the past that gets revealed doesn't just rattle Millicent, but it also shakes up the entire way Dorothy Jane now views her entire existence.
I'm the reason you don't have your diploma. I'm the reason you don't have a professional occupation. You have to take in little odd jobs just to make ends meet.
Oh, don't put this all on yourself, honey. You were too small to do anything about it.
All my life, I sit in my bedroom window complaining about our situation. And all this time, it's been my fault.
Don't do this to yourself, sweetheart. It is not your fault.
But upon feeling like she was the one that prevented her mother from finishing high school, Dorothy Jane now pushes her mom to finish it by getting her GED. Now, Millicent begins studying hard, but the pressure really gets to her, and she even declares that she's considering quitting. But luckily, she gets some helpful encouragement one night when she's visited by...
Millicent can't quit.
What?
Elmo says nobody's quitting. First grade is hard, and they don't give you cues, but Elmo is going to first grade, and Elmo never quits. No, no, no.
What the heck? So we've got a deep story about teenage pregnancy and the importance of a high school education, also having a crossover scene with Sesame Street. What? The scene is obviously played up as a hallucination Millicent is having, and despite how odd it is, it does provide some very comedic moments to help balance out the more dramatic parts of the story.
You are a manifestation of my own fatigue.
Elmo is Elmo.
Now the episode ends with a very well done scene where Millicent is able to show off her newly acquired high school diploma to Dorothy Jane, and we also get one of the best mother-daughter bonding scenes of the entire series here.
I will take this diploma and put it in a frame and hang it on the wall and feel very proud of myself every time I look at it. But when I found out I was going to have you, I didn't care about anything else in this world.
Mama,
What?
Thanks for having me.
Anytime.
Now, episode 13, Double Date, features a much lighter, yet still very well done tale. Both Dorothy Jane and Millicent are still having problems when it comes to getting into the dating scene again. So Dorothy Jane calls a local radio personality and date expert, Kitty, aka the Love Professor. And she actually takes a house call, and Kitty just immediately begins helping the two ladies out by setting them up on dates. And by the way, Kitty is such an incredibly entertaining character in every scene she is in. What makes her a great character, though, is overall, she's kind and caring, but she's also loud and crazy. She has no sense of how far she's getting mixed into people's personal lives, but is still always putting people's best intentions at the forefront of her mind.
Wait a minute! Who gave you the right to come in here and tell me how to raise my own daughter?
Hey, she called me, you feed me French toast. I was just an innocent bystander talking on the radio. Give me some coffee.
Now, both Dorothy Jane and Millicent go on dates with the new respective guys they've met. However, the dates don't go that well, but the two do recognize how the experience will help them move forward. Now, the rest of the season winds up having mostly simpler stories. Not bad stories, just simpler. One episode features Dorothy Jane trying to change her personality too much in order to get guys to notice her, but in the end, learns the simple message of just being herself. Another episode features Dorothy Jane trying to shoo away an annoying boy named Kirby who likes her, and there's later a tale featuring Dorothy Jane and Kirby taking care of an egg baby. Although in that simpler tale, where she has to pretend to be married to Kirby for an assignment, Dorothy Jane starts to finally realize why she's pursued older guys all this time and has had so many poetic-like fantasies about them.
I grew up in an environment where our father didn't really help raise us kids and left most of the responsibility to our mother. So naturally, I'm very frightened of marriage and very distrusting. So I invent fantasies about marrying exotic French men, because in my heart I know that it's not real. I can't bear the reality of what I believe marriage really is.
Things get more complex again, though, in episode 17, The Long Goodbye. In that story, Dorothy Jane's father, Randall, is back again. And despite them being divorced now, he's still trying to win Millicent back over. But he also tries to help Dorothy Jane feel better after she gets upset that a boy she liked moved away without saying goodbye. Randall tries to tell Dorothy Jane, though, that if a boy leaves a girl for a long period of time without saying goodbye, it actually means the boy must really like them. Yeah, if that sounds really twisted and wrong, that's because it should. Randall is obviously trying to paint his actions in the past as right, and is trying to convince his daughter that those types of actions are appropriate as a means to validate what he's done before. This causes Millicent and Randall to have some pretty serious arguments about how Dorothy Jane is being raised. In the end, Randall leaves again. The family is no better off, and life does not improve. However, this time, Randall does say goodbye to his family rather than sneaking off. So at least there's hope that he, and anyone, can start to grow and improve a little bit, even if it's just one little thing at a time. The second to last episode of the season, It's My Party, actually brings Dorothy Jane's character arc full circle. After being the least popular girl in school in the second episode of the series, circumstances have now allowed Dorothy Jane to become very popular now. But as a means to keep her popularity at a very high standard, she excludes a girl from an even worse poverty-stricken environment. Now, Dorothy Jane obviously learns her lesson in the end, but it's good to see that after a year's worth of character-building adventures, she has indeed grown a lot. Then, in the final episode of the season, on Poison, we get a story that focuses on Millicent inheriting her late aunt's dog. Millicent is not happy about this because her aunt always despised her for taking the married and mother life over the career-driven and single life that she wanted her to take. However, via video message, Millicent learns her aunt did realize late in life that a life of successful career without family or loved ones around you isn't a life worth living. It causes Millicent to feel more proud of the life she now has, that being raising a family. She may have made bad choices along the way, but every choice she made was out of love for others, and that's something that should be celebrated. The Torkelsons Season 1 is a very fine piece of television, but that being said, it does suffer a bit from Season 1 syndrome, in that it does feel like the show is still trying to figure out its voice and what really works early on. For example, Millicent is given a rotation of adult friends to talk to throughout the first season. First, it's some guy named Butcher who only shows up in the first episode. Then, it's her mother-in-law for a while. Then, it's some other mother her age in one episode. But finally the series settled on Kitty, and she really worked the best. Her interactions with Millicent were extremely entertaining, but so were her interactions with Mr. Hodges. The two were just so different personality-wise, but strangely enough, they actually get along very well, resulting in them becoming a very odd but very fun comedic duo.
Miss Torkelson, chicken fried steak's a particular favorite of mine. Is no good cold.
Well, I, for one, think it is highly offensive mooching off of somebody else's food without an invitation and without asking.
I'll split it with you.
Serve it up.
But speaking of characters, the show didn't always know how to use them, most notably the 4 younger Torkelson children. You see, none of the 4 younger kids have been given names in this review thus far because none of them received much character development. Aside from 2 or 3 stories, arguably, they didn't grow much. They had individual personalities, but at many times, the kids could have switched half of their lines with each other, and it would not have affected the story at all. They were really just there to remind you, Millicent has 5 kids, and raising 5 kids is hard. Probably the most standout performer of the 4 younger kids, though, is the youngest, Mary Sue. Her interactions with Mr. Hodges were always nice to watch.
So what is that, a bologna sandwich? I'd be willing to take a bite of that sandwich if you want some help.
I don't want to spoil your dinner, Mary Sue.
You won't spoil my dinner. I'm always hungry. Mama says I got an empty leg.
All right. I'm going to give you 1 bite.
Well, that's all I want.
Well, that's all you're going to get.
But even with fun moments like that, the show's comedy wasn't always the best. Outside of Kitty, despite there being a handful of good silly moments, the show was not that funny. The first few episodes especially tried really hard at throwing out tons of jokes, but none of them stuck well. But apparently the show's writers realized this, because as the show moved on, the amount of comedic moments decreased a lot, to the point where there'd be 5 to 8 minutes of screen time with no jokes being said or laughter being heard. Thus, the Torkelsons at times became more of a straight drama show, and when they were doing that, they actually pulled off some really good stories. The show is excellent at never talking down to viewers, and just simply showing true-to-life tales that show viewers of all ages real problems that real people in the world do go through and how to navigate through them. And the 2 main leads always pulled off their dramatic stories incredibly well. After the first few episodes, Connie Ray as Millicent became the perfect representation of what so many hardworking mothers dealing with serious stress and hardships really do go through, complexity, flaws, and all. And Olivia Burnett, who played Dorothy Jane, carried every scene she was in with expert skill. Very few actors at any time in television history have been able to pull off the kind of very elegant and intelligent style of speaking that she often had. Plus, only an actress of her high quality could consistently pull off the monologue she did in every episode. These being when she looked up at the sky and talked to the mysterious man in the moon every night, which is eventually revealed to be her nickname she's given to God as a means to simply make talking to the Lord more informal. The Torkelsons Season 1 is by far one of the most underappreciated sitcom seasons in all of television history. Unfortunately, though, the network it was on didn't like the rural setting, so the show was dramatically retooled in the show's very different second season. Season 2 of The Torkelsons featured Millicent losing her home and moving her family into a new house in the city where she's been hired to become a nanny by an upper-middle-class single man raising his 2 teenage kids. Now, in this season, the show was actually retitled Almost Home. It could be considered a sequel show, but Disney and reruns would actually put both seasons together under the Torkelsons banner. So yeah, Disney actually considers these 2 seasons one show, so there you go. The season begins revealing that Millicent just didn't make enough money to pay the mortgage in time and is being kicked out of her old house. We actually get some time to see the family say goodbye to the old set one last time before, wait, there are only 3 kids now. Yeah, apparently 2 of Millicent's kids have just disappeared. And they didn't run away or something, they act like they've never existed now. I'm just gonna guess aliens interfered with the timeline and the two kids have been retconned out of existence. I mean, it's happened before in sitcoms. The Little Sister and Family Matters, anyone? Now, the transition to the new format might feel a bit rushed. I mean, we don't even get to say goodbye to Mr. Hodges, but it's still pretty well played out. Now, the new family dynamic does have exactly the type of conflict you'd expect. The teenagers that Millicent is supposed to be a nanny to don't like Millicent and her kids, but they slowly learn to get along. The more surprising moment, though, is Millicent's interactions with her new employer, Brian, in their first episode together. Brian at first seems like he's the typical bad parent who only cares about business and not his kids. But we eventually learn Brian is so busy because
my wife started this little mail order catalog business of kids' clothes and toys, which she called Molly Gregory. And when she died, it was really all I had left of her in the whole world besides my children. And I guess for that reason, it just became impossible for me to take the company apart, even though it wasn't really making any money. Anyway, the point is, I sort of let my law practice dissolve instead and had to sink or swim on the basis of Molly Gregory. And it takes a lot of late nights to swim.
As the season progresses, though, Millicent is actually able to find a way to get Brian to spend more time with his kids, and he actually does. He even eventually winds up being able to stay at home with the kids just as much as Millicent. Now, the majority of the rest of the season is just standard sitcom stuff. It's not bad, but the thing is, the Torkelsons Season 1 was such a unique format. This is just standard seen it a million times sitcom situations. You have a couple of kids and adults living in a simple middle-class home in the city. They go through wacky shenanigans, but learn a lesson and grow a little bit. Seriously, many of the sets, plots, and guest characters just feel recycled from so many other 80s and 90s sitcoms. And the show goes from having comedy mixed with good drama to just being a standard sitcom with tons of comedy in every scene. But that being said, this is still better than average sitcom stuff here. First off, the two new teen characters are pretty entertaining. Brian's youngest child, Molly, played by Brittany Murphy, does do a pretty good job at playing a typical slacker girl while still infusing plenty of personality. And then there's Gregory, played by Jason Marsden. And if you are an animation or sitcom enthusiast, you obviously know who Jason Marsden is and how great his acting abilities are. Easily, he was the best new addition to the series. Every time Jason Marsden speaks, he is just purely entertaining to watch. Even if his lines aren't the best, just the way he delivers everything he says in this season feels like solid fun. Plus, the writers knew how good a comedic line deliverer he was because almost every episode has him saying nothing but silly one-liners and great witty dialogue.
Mr. Morgan wants me to model for his catalog.
Well, Chucky Lee, don't you need to know something about modeling?
Oh, heck no, I didn't. I don't know anything. That didn't come out right.
But he does get some good emotional moments too. For example, he has a best friend named Sam, but he doesn't realize his tomboy friend actually has romantic feelings for him. So we actually get a good episode called The Dance that actually features Jason Marsden at his best, playing a teenager who is trying to sort out his conflicted feelings of friendship and romance he's starting to feel towards his best friend. It's actually a very good story.
I don't know what I am, Dad. I mean, I see this really hot-looking babe, and I want to go to my best friend and say, hey, I just met this really beautiful-looking girl. And then I realize that this really beautiful-looking girl is my best friend.
Meanwhile, the only other ongoing plot in this season is the relationship between Millicent and Brian. They tease in a few episodes that they could have some romantic feelings for the other, but it doesn't go anywhere. Instead, they sort of evolve into each other's simple companion. They start to become co-parents together, spending time with both their own kids and the other's kids pretty equally. By the end of the season, they're actually doing everything a typical married couple does, except do anything romantic. This might be because they both are a year in from losing their respective partners from past marriages, but aren't ready to go into romance yet. But they have some pretty good emotional scenes together still. Although they do still have one very funny scene together where Brian takes Millicent to a dinner he's having with a client of his.
And your lady is a delight.
Oh, no, she's not my lady. I mean, she's a lady, but she's not mine. I mean, she's mine because I pay her to live with me, but...
You dig that hole any deeper, you're going to strike oil. I'm his nanny.
Well, if my nanny had been as attractive as you, I'd have kept her into adulthood myself.
Aside from that, there is still some good stuff mixed into the simple standard sitcom stuff in this season. In the episode Is That All There Is, Dorothy Jane finally gets a steady boyfriend in her life, played by Ben Affleck. No, I'm not kidding. Young Ben Affleck plays her boyfriend in the episode. Seriously. Later episodes, though, feature her and Molly becoming more like sisters in a best friend kind of way, and they start to slowly care for the other. And in the final episode, we see the non-traditional family being closer than ever, as the parents truly now see the value the other brings to the table, plus the kids really do now care for both parents and every fellow child in the household now.
You're lucky, Gregory. Your dad's really cool.
Chucky Lee, anytime you want to borrow him, feel free. Except on allowance.
Now, it's obvious the show would have eventually had them all become more of a real blended family in the end, but sadly at episode 33, the series was cancelled, thus ending Michael Jacobs' time creating a traditional sitcom for Disney television. Until he immediately began work on Boy Meets World, which premiered months later. And now it's time for the inevitable, comparing this show to Boy Meets World. Now, the most immediate thing that comes to mind when comparing the Torkelsons to Boy Meets World is both series were very well remembered at showing viewers just how difficult life can really be. Both shows expertly did tales that would pull the rug out from young people's expectations of how they thought life would turn out as they got older, and instead showed the more realistic things that probably will happen as you get older, no matter how dark or complex it is. Now, Boy Meets World did tackle a wider range of relevant topics for young viewers, but that's mostly because they had more episodes to do so. But something the Torkelsons did that made them stand out more thematically was they got darker at times. Yes, Boy Meets World had some dark episodes, but most of their darker moments were followed up by the end of the episode or a later episode, indicating that things would indeed get better. The Torkelsons, though, actually had a handful of episodes where something bad happens and that's it. The situation stinks and there's nothing that can be done to improve it. That's almost depressing at times. Although one could argue this makes the show more relatable to people that are currently going through serious problems themselves. But the stories over time would show you how, even though some problems, such as broken relationships and even broken marriages, may never be fixed, but you can still move forward with your life and forge a better tomorrow. So it is optimistic in that sense. Another interesting thing about the Torkelsons was when you realize how some of the elements from the series actually wove their way into Boy Meets World. You see, the Torkelsons was about a family living in poverty, but when the show got cancelled, in order to still tell tales about people living in poverty, Boy Meets World, while having its main character, Corey Matthews, live in a middle-class home, would have one of its supporting characters in the show, that being Corey's best friend Sean, be an individual that still lives in a poverty-stricken environment himself. Thus, the writers of Boy Meets World were able to bring over stories they could have used in the Torkelsons over into plot lines focusing on Sean in Boy Meets World. But now comes the big question. If the Torkelsons was so good and so similar to Boy Meets World, why was it cancelled? Well, in an interview done with Michael Jacobs during the lead-up to Girl Meets World series premiere, he did speak highly of the Torkelsons, but admitted that the network didn't like the idea of a rural show. The idea just seemed old-fashioned and backwards to TV executives. Another similar reason may also be that, in the 90s, post-Cold War American pop culture was trying to move forward and address new societal problems and just wanted to live in denial of long-standing American culture issues such as poverty still existing. And a show like The Torkelsons didn't help with that mentality. Plus, while the show was obviously very relatable to low-income families, it obviously wasn't to upper-class families who were less likely to watch the show. And evidence over the last 20 years in television history has suggested that mainstream channels are more likely to let a show with not the best ratings survive if it has a more wealthy demographic watching it, which can thus spend more money on things being advertised, versus shows being watched by just low-income audiences. Now, the show did move to a city environment in the second season, but by that point it was just another typical middle-class sitcom just like all the other ones on TV. But it could have survived with this revamp. But the other issue with the show was the episodes premiered on Saturday nights. And the 90s was when Saturday night was slowly turning into the night where no one watched network TV. Virtually no family shows that got their start on Saturday nights in the 90s ever survived. Now, the show was later rerun on Disney Channel on weekday afternoons, but it was only rerun in the 90s when Disney Channel was a premium cable channel, and thus less people had access to the channel back then. Plus, this was back when network channels still offered lots of children's shows to watch on weekday afternoons, so sadly, the Torkelsons just never got a proper chance for people to check it out. And honestly, it's really sad that's how it all went down. The Torkelsons is really a great timeless show that deals with serious and relatable issues both people in poverty and people that live anywhere deal with. It didn't hide how harsh growing up is, but did show how to properly do it. Again, if you're a fan of Boy Meets World or Girl Meets World, this really is the show that gives off the same feel as those two programs. So check it out whenever you can and build the buzz and support for this show, and maybe, just maybe, we can convince Disney to get the show back on TV, or DVD, or some official streaming service. Because this really is one of the most underappreciated family shows that anybody, anywhere, should check out.